Greetings, everybody. Coming to you here from icy cold Chicago, Illinois. So I got the hat and sweater on today. Incidentally, for those of you who are watching, sorry for my poor production value. Hopefully, I'll be working on that sometime in the next little while. But I figure while I'm still extremely small and sort of working this thing out, it's not really going to hurt anybody. That being said, today we're going to talk about what I might call the myth of cultural appropriation. That might bug some people, but if you don't have a catchy title, I'm not going to watch your video, right? Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation and what I think of it, because that's what people do, is offer their opinions on stuff, right? So here we go. First, I think when you're discussing anything, it's good to have a definition of it, right? It seems to be a pretty simple version of the accepted definition is this. Cultural appropriation would be the adoption or use of elements of one culture by members of a different culture, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to accept it as, and we're going to discuss the definition a little bit in a second or two. But just have a couple points on this. And again, this is not meant to discriminate against anybody or point fingers at anybody. But I feel pretty strongly on this subject. So here we go. First of all, is the reality or the fact that especially by the time we've reached 2017. Happy New Year's, by the way, everybody. Nearly all cultures engage in cultural appropriation to some extent. The exchange, I would tend to call it the exchange of cultural elements. Almost every culture does it, especially almost every Western culture, and now even most Eastern cultures, African cultures. I mean, you can see everything from the way people dress to the way they think to the music they listen to. Everybody does it. To me, these fall into four main categories. First would be technological developments. Many different cultures have come up with many great technological developments. Some as simple as the Chinese gunpowder, or not as simple as profound as that, but I mean that's a technological development, right? The car, right? Many different things that have been developed by many cultures, and every culture has made significant contributions to the world in general, right? The other sort of a joint category of art and music. I guess you could consider music a type of art. I surely do. But in terms of artistic expression, even in terms of schools of art, and modes of art, in the way artists are educated and apply their craft, many different cultures have provided us with many great examples of art and music. And there are bits and pieces of these in many different artistic expressions throughout the world. So you could find African-influenced art in Europe. You could find European-influenced art in Africa. Next, I would say fashion. I think that's pretty easy. I don't think that even requires much discussion. I mean, you obviously see different modes of fashion that have been inspired by various cultures all around the world. The last point on this is, I would say, philosophy, which I think people probably don't consider that much. But when you're talking about, especially governmental philosophy and social philosophy, there's a lot of different people from a lot of different parts of the world who have contributed greatly, whether it be Sun Tzu's The Art of War, or Nietzsche, or Kant, all over the place. There's people who have, added things to the lexicon of knowledge in human existence. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I think that's how you advance as a society, and I think we should focus more on being a human society and a human culture instead of separating ourselves and attaching more labels, right? Anyway, last thing on this subject I wanted to mention is the concept of the melting pot, right, and Western culture. I mean, that's what this country was supposed to be, is a melting pot, and we embraced that for a long time, and now we seem to be wanting to separate and say that no. Before it was, yes, everybody come here and everybody add stuff to the pot and it's going to be a great soup. And now we're saying, oh no, you can't use our ingredient to put in this soup because you're a racist or you're a bad person or something like that. But Western culture in general, I think, is kind of built on modern Western culture anyway, on this melting pot theme. And all of a sudden now it's vilified, and I don't quite understand why. Anyway, enough on that point. Moving on to the next one, I think is again a problem that I see, and it's not necessarily a problem, but it is difficult. When you want to debate something, you have to have definitions of the terms you're debating, and it seems very commonplace that people are trying to change or stretch definitions and expand their scope to sort of fit their particular argumentation. So in this case, we see that basically the idea currently is that an oppressor culture appropriates from the subjugated or marginalized culture, which is very, very similar to the shoddy logic which purports that only white people can be racist. Which, I mean, if you apply any logic to that, it just disintegrates very, very quickly. And on one of my previous videos, say if you want to change the terminology a little bit, we can change it. But basically, you're saying that only only the oppressor culture, the dominant culture, can steal things from the marginalized culture. Again, that's just factually not the case, and it's really silly to argue that, and I think it just kind of spins your wheels. So the additional implication here is that culture appropriation is sort of tantamount to abuse or racism, which I think is what gets people's grinds their gears, to use a Family Guy reference. According to the definition we read above, right, nothing in that definition really implies racism or abuse at all, or even any sort of negative connotation, except the word appropriation. So we'll define that one as well. This is from Webster's dictionary, right? So appropriation is the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. So generally, again, this implies theft or usurpation, or that the appropriated thing is never to be returned to its owner. All right. So a couple of things on this. One is that in terms of permission, I mean, when we talk about cultural appropriation, there are millions of people in each culture, it would seem. So do I have to get permission from every single member of a culture to wear their clothing or to listen to their music? That just seems silly. And again, it can be a very nebulous definition as to what constitutes a culture and who constitutes a culture. So it's very, very problematic to say that the permission is not given. Just in terms of logically applying it, doesn't make any sense. But it's to me that's laughable, right? So, but this is really not what happens in cultural appropriation if you think about it. Very obviously, the progenitors of the appropriated thing or idea are still able to use them. So it's not as if these things have been permanently stolen and taken away from the people that created them. They're just adopted into other cultures, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, by definition, it's part of growth and evolution, right? So really, if you think about the definition and the terminology involved in cultural appropriation, it's a bit misleading, somewhat conflagratory, and kind of tacitly contradicts its own definition, right? Because if you read the definition, it really doesn't have that many negative connotations. But then if you start, analyzing all the wording within it, it does. And again, this is to me like, well, I won't go too much more onto it because I don't want to make the video too terribly long. So the next couple things I want to discuss are holiday examples. The two that I'm going to discuss are Halloween and St. Patty's Day. St. Patty's Day nobody talks about, but Halloween everybody discusses this, right? So I'm going to go into the Halloween argument a little bit. Now I'll concede that people can act in an ignorant and insensitive way, and that maybe sometimes their choices of Halloween costumes are downright offensive. Unfortunately, that's their right. If you don't like it, stay away from them. You can express your distaste, but remember, I mean, this is a holiday that's focused on revelry, fun. So taking it too seriously seems to be a little bit counterintuitive. And if this is your focus, you probably need to focus elsewhere, I would say. A few idiots in blackface. Yeah, they might be idiots, but who cares? There's plenty of idiots doing plenty of idiotic things. Let's not focus on this too much. The question I have too would be, when does the censoring of costumes end? Pretty soon we're gonna need to submit any potential Halloween costume to some sort of tribunal. That's just silly. That's the thing I like to think about when we're talking about censoring things. Or where does it stop? Where do the limitations stop? Right? Because you don't like a word or you don't like a costume or something doesn't necessarily give you the right to legislate the prevention of its usage, especially in America. Keep this in mind as well. A costume depicting traditional garb of another culture is not by definition racist. I'm going to say this probably a couple times, or maybe this will be the only time I say it, but imitation is the highest form of flattery, they say. Sincerest form of flattery. When that white kid's listening to rap music, it's not because he hates black people. It's probably because he thinks like those rappers are cool, right? Also, to flip the script a little bit, plenty of people dress in traditional European clothing. For these days, Viking costumes are very popular. You see a lot of people in Tracht, which is or otherwise known as Lederhosen, traditional German costumes, or around Chicago, Polish traditional Polish dress. Again, it doesn't mean that they have anything against your culture or that they're racist towards you in any way. It just means that for Halloween they're deciding to imitate it, for some reason, and it's generally because they might think that it's a really beautiful thing, like an example of the Asian dress that a lot of mostly women use for Halloween. It's distinctive, it's beautiful, and it's somewhat different. So that's what they use it for Halloween, right? Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean they hate Asians. So I'd also say that the number of people who really engage in racist or derogatory Halloween expression is minuscule. It's a tiny amount of people. Of course, they get all the press, but very, very few people are actually purposely, intentionally being racist with their Halloween costumes or provocative. Well, not provocative because we see a lot of that, but there are real problems in America, and I don't see this as one of them. Again, imitation is the highest form of flattery. That's what Halloween is about. It's about imitation. It's about fantasy. It's about doing something different from the norm. So that's it's kind of part and parcel of what goes on, and I think we take it way too seriously. Which brings me to St. Patrick's Day. If you're talking about a marginalized people, right? Irish were certainly one for a long time. Tens of thousands of people died during their 10 years of indentured servitude. They came to this country in bondage, although it was paid bondage. But oftentimes, Irish were treated very, very poorly, and a large proportion of them did not survive their periods of indentured servitude because of their mistreatment. And even after that, they were treated as second-class citizens for a long period of time in this country, and even to a large extent in their own countries during British rule. St. Patrick's Day features some pretty overt stereotypes, and most of them aren't very flattering. And during this festival, millions of Americans flagrantly appropriate the culture of a long marginalized group. Yet there's no outrage. We don't call to ban there's no call to ban St. Patrick's Day. Why? Because the Irish know that this, just like Halloween or like a Cinco de Mayo, is just a silly, harmless holiday which is about having fun. And Americans make everything about that sort of celebration, like let's get inebriated and dance around and do silly things. It's not about racism. It's not about marginalizing or othering people. It's just about people having fun. All right. And then before I conclude, I just want to go into a little bit of this is going to seem like a rant, kind of intended as one, but this is hyperbolic satire. Okay, so let's not go calling me a racist or saying, oh, he believes this or he believes that, because I believe that people should be able to use all manner of things from various cultures. But so by the very logic of cultural appropriation, let's go to some things that we or you or whoever can't use. Okay, one would be numbers. Because our number system is based on Arabic, right? As is a lot of math developed by the Persian culture and Arabic cultures a long time ago. So we can't use numbers or math if you're not Arabic. So that's one. If you're not European, of European descent, I guess specifically German, I think, you can't use a printing press. So if you read a newspaper or any books or anything like that, no, you're going to have to not do that, right? Unless the book was handwritten and handbound. Bullets. Can't use bullets or anything that is fired by gunpowder because that was invented by the Chinese. So no gun use. Sorry, that's cultural appropriation. And this is going to sound racist, but I really don't give a shit. If white people can't have dreadlocks, which I would say that historically that's inaccurate because there are very many cultures who had matted hair, matted long hair that was formed, whether intentionally or not, into things that would very, very closely resemble, if not be identical to dreadlocks. So black people, you can't straighten your hair anymore. Sorry. And curly-haired people, you can't do that because you're culturally appropriating either Asian culture or European culture. Also, for Latinos and Asians, or Latinas, Latinx, whatever you're gonna call it, you can't bleach your hair because that's culturally appropriating European hair. So sorry, no more of that. If you are not of European descent, you can no longer use a car because that was developed by Europeans, so that's cultural appropriation. Not that I like cowboy hats, but if you wear a cowboy hat and you're not American, sorry, you got to take that off. That's cultural appropriation. If you wish to engage in democracy, can't do that. That's cultural appropriation. It was created by the ancient Greeks, right? So sorry, can't be democratic unless you're Greek, I guess, right? Or possibly European. Music is a fun one too. If you're not African or African American, sorry, no rock and rolls. Rock and roll comes from blues, which is a very specifically developed by African American descendants of slaves. So can't listen to blues, can't listen to rock and roll if you're not of African descent. So sorry, everybody's got to turn in all your albums and your MP3s. And then people of color, sorry, but you can't listen to country western music because that's American. And people of color can't listen to European style classical music either. Sorry, that's cultural appropriation, right? Again, I know that's exaggerated, but oh yeah, another one, video games, yeah, developed by Americans. If you're not American, you got to put your video games down, right? And Halloween too, you can't celebrate that unless you're European because it's a European holiday. Anyway, enough of that. But I just want to kind of expose the faulty logic that people employ when they're doing this whole thing. So ultimately, I would contend that our current obsession with the phenomenon of cultural appropriation is really it's a fruitless endeavor. It's filled with hypocrisy, logical fallacies, in terms of definition, discussion, and the implementation. All cultures engage in the exchange and development of ideas, art, music, technological invention. This is how we grow. It's how we evolve. To label this as theft is both, to me, disingenuous and patently inaccurate. By focusing on cultural appropriation as a problem, we continue to divide people, to convolute already confused ideologies and help foment an environment which stifles liberty and free expression, not promote it, Certainly there are those in any society which, mock, dislike, or even detest others only based on what they are instead of who they are. And these people may seek to denigrate us by somehow, misusing cultural items. But really, these people are troglodytes, and they're a very small minority, and their ideas are generally dismissed by anybody with a brain, and by everybody but the lunatic fringe, as it were. So again, I would say that most of these blowhards who tout this sort of rhetoric only do so to publicize themselves, and I'm going to say this over and over again. They have no real desire to create any real beneficial change in society. They categorically fail to present any sort of solution to the problems that they identify. Because if they did, the problem might go away. We could actually get rid of the problems that are identified, and all of a sudden, whoa, poof, along with their source of funding, their popularity also goes away. So think about that when you're watching videos or reading articles. Talk about bias. It's a selfish bias. So there are plenty of real problems to be addressed in America. So let's get down to business on those, right? Thank you.